Hello, this is Theta from the doctor, and in this video, I'll be life coaching about a review of Personal Development 1 and why it's really hard to pass. Because once you realize that, let's say, you feel as if you passed it, you didn't pass it because there's actually more to discover. And when you're discovering more, you realize, okay, if this ended, then the whole rule book changed. And that's what happens every time you pass or fail. Both are at a superposition of states. Once you pass, you lose something. Everything you gain, you'll also lose. But if there is a way to not lose and not gain, you must see it from a like how would I say this? Kind of like how a graph works. Graphing in a hypergraph language, you have different nodes: A, B, C, D, 1, 2, 3, LMX, or fractional integer like mixed dimensions, rural space. All those are beyond personal development into a whole new lens of scientific development. All I gotta say, it's not about really living in a game, you know? It's fun, but we use games as like tokens for revenge value to grow, and that kind of changes the way we think. However, what's really clear is that in the silence that comes, you find that you start to hear again, but in a new way. Every silence carries a new texture. Silence does fall constantly, but brings a new way of hearing, a new way of seeing, because silence is not just about losing the way of looking, seeing. It's all your senses start to evaporate. And you didn't know this, but personal development is clearly, by a lot of gurus, seen to be the eradication of the ego, right? The eradication and the cultivation of the spirit. But that's right and wrong, because the ego does come back, because there's always an ego. But in your mind, you label it as not being there. And you can't find that state of mind that thinks that way, because our mind doesn't think with thoughts. We are not our thoughts. So if we have a negative thought, that's not us. If we do something, it's still not us, but it's closer to who we are. Our physical change of what we do in the world marks our definitive article of who we are. And that means if everything is already predicted by the AKR structure that was originally found before the cultivation of personal development, means that everything is utterly predicted. Predictable algorithm is how personal development works. So you need to use predictive algorithm to generate modulation, and modulation to forward a trend and change, and then it turns into new structures that bend the laws of what we already have, but they actually follow them necessarily. PD2 focuses on wholly fragmented perspectives, but they're not fragmented. They're like fractions, fractional understandings of language. Not just fractional, but they're numeric, because when you go below 1 to 0 to -1, all those are especially fractional or subfractional and such a thing. That's what the original structure for permutations used to be as. But then as we get older, we get closer to this pseudo hypergraphic lens that kind of bends how we view life. Straight lines become more haphazard and more disaligned, sideways, hashways, kind of like that. However, what you learned in PD2 was a lot of the stuff like betterment, structure of betterment would work if you actually thought it was real. And you do think it's real, but your mind says it's not. So you must always strive for betterment. But you're going to do the old stuff or the new stuff. It's a ancient future. The more you go through it. And silence comes again, and we learn from that. Every time you have silence, you need to communicate it. Always. You need to be your total self at all points, but that makes you most vulnerable because you make your vulnerable self completely there. And then when you get comfortable enough, you won't need to be the same age all the time. You start to grow in gradual change. Happens over time. So, what is the point to all of this? Well, PD2 is like a fork in a logic gate. Undefined or identified state that is not 0 or 1, that has multiple variables to it. It's beyond multiversal, omniversal, because it shows a state of uncertainty for all possibilities, which creates forks in a space-time algorithm. In the space-time algorithm, that is how everything works. Goes down to space-time, and the gravitational lens of it, resonance, is no longer necessary because gravity is used more. But it's kind of what was already used before. I'm talking in phrases, so this is the end of your graduation party. So now, as you're transitioning, you're in 13.5. But, what is to learn from this? Well, now it's not about relaxing because you can't relax as an adult. Relaxation as an adult is not possible. You had that fortune when you were younger, but you always have to keep your mind busy unless you have a different personality trait. And that's actually a lesson to learn from. Once you heighten your gradual state through this electation, because graduation is basically an election to a higher ceremony class, you'll be diverging into a state of, well, still talking in riddles. Stop this. Stop. Right, makes sense. You're influenced by the students as the teachers, witnessing what the principals are doing, but not listening to their techniques because they know nothing about teaching. But this is where it changes. Principals are like Donald Trump. He doesn't really know politics, but he guides it. Politicians sometimes don't know what they're talking about, but you have to follow what they're saying. Follow the rules. But it's like listening to something you don't agree with, but agreeing with it anyways, and then creating new rules past that. And it continues. So you're in the future mentality, but you have to get used to the future to move on. So we no longer live in the past or present because those times are already accelerated by entropic disaster, which you thought it was entropic, but it's just information. So welcome to the future. thank you for watching this class for the day, because the class continues throughout the day. But I'll be saying more.